Okay, so hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Professor Pamela Karimi. I'm the director of the Office of Undergraduate Research, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's information session. For your information, we have planned for a lot of these information sessions throughout the spring semester. So please keep an eye on your emails. I will inform you of other information sessions that will be of use to you in the near future. So today's session is specifically about engaging in research with human subjects. In certain fields such as psychology, nursing, art education, anthropology, and many sociological fields, undergraduate research projects involve interactions with and or identifiable data about human beings as participants. Some undergraduate research activities that involve human participants require approval by the Institutional Review Board, which is otherwise known as IRB. You may have heard IRB many, many times throughout your experiences while doing your studies here at UMass Dartmouth. So IRB stands for Institutional Review Board, and it's the federally mandated committee that reviews human subjects research protocols. Today, I'm joined with Professor Elizabeth Richardson from the Psychology Department, who is also the chair of IRB at UMass Dartmouth, as well as Leslie Young, who is an IRB expert and a third-year UMass Dartmouth law student. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the platform to Professor Richardson.
Thank you so much, Professor Karimi, for hosting this. And hopefully this is kind of one of a series of many that we try to offer around campus, I think for graduate students, for undergraduate students. So I'm grateful for those of us who could join us today, and then hopefully others will be able to listen down the road to the recording. If any of the people that are on right now could let me know what department you're in, that would also be helpful, so that I can maybe tailor some examples based on the department that you're in and the type of research you might be interested in. So you can either submit those to the chat or just shout them out. I'm hoping this will be fairly kind of informal for you guys. I do have a few things prepared to go over, like basic information and then questions that you might have. Thank you so much, Emily. So I see nursing again from Vanessa. Okay, and then teaching research methods, art history, great. Yes, so let me see. Research methods in, sociology. Oh, cool, okay. All right, very good. Thank you so much for doing that, I appreciate that. So my name's Elizabeth Richardson. I am a professor in the psychology department. I took over as IRB chair in May-ish of last year. And then Leslie Young is a third-year law student. She has been working with me. She's been a great help as the two of us go through many of the applications that come in. I'm just talking about you, Leslie. So we work together each week to review applications that end up getting submitted to the IRB email address. So you'll see at the end of the slides that I have prepared, there's the IRB email address. You can always reach out to us if you have questions and you don't, that you either don't have them now and they come up later after you get done with this session, or if you'd rather just shoot us an email. So that's in as well. Leslie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Leslie. I'm a third-year law student. I'm currently at the law school. That's why I have a mask on. I've been working with Elizabeth since last March with IRB related stuff. Yeah, I'm happy to help if anybody has any questions. I just jumped on because I got out of class, so I'm not really sure where you're at in the meeting.
We haven't even shared screen yet. So just kind of doing introductions and trying to get a sense of where folks are from. So we've got nursing represented, sociology, art history, think those are the ones that were represented, but you know, we'll cover all bases. So I can share screen if you'd like, Professor Karimi. Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and do that, and I will jump into showing you a few slides I have pulled together. Let me, can everybody see that? Let me just make sure. I want to share it so that you don't see it, so it's a pretty version. Here we go. Okay, maybe not. Is it in slideshow format? I can't tell.
If you go back up and maybe hit play from start. Slideshow, yeah, hit the slideshow.
Aha, thank you. Perfect. All right, thank you. So Leslie, definitely I'll start going through, but feel free to jump in. I think two voices when it comes to this stuff is always better than one. So feel free to throw in your 2 cents. You definitely have more than 2 cents to say, so that will be very much appreciated. Okay, so we're talking about the IRB today and engaging in research with human subjects. That's the official title of this talk. So we thought a good first place to get started is you had a brief introduction earlier to what is the IRB, but basically every university is required by law to have an IRB of record that is reviewing any human subjects research that's being conducted. So we are responsible for reviewing any human subjects research that's going on campus. And so if you're looking to prepare a research project, a thesis, a dissertation, an independent study, you're going to want to work with your faculty member and then submit the project to the IRB for review. What happens is you'll submit through the email that we'll provide for you, the documents that I'll share a list of what you're going to be submitting. And then depending on the level of review, Leslie and I are pretty good at getting back to people within a couple weeks for the most part. If it's a more complicated study that requires full board review, meaning all of the IRB committee meeting, that can take anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks. So it just takes a little bit more time because it's a more complicated process. All right, so there are 3 levels or 3 categories that human subjects research is reviewed under. And so the most complex is the full board review. And then we've got 2 other categories of exempt research and expedited research. So I'm going to walk you through, first off, what I actually mean by human subjects research, because that's a question in and of itself. But I want to take a little bit of time to talk about what we mean by exempt research and expedited research. Sometimes I think that people check expedited research because they want it to go through really quickly. And it's expedited research doesn't refer to how fast it will get reviewed. It's based on level of risk. Okay, so human subjects research. So the first question that you ask yourself is if your project is actually going to be involving human subjects. And what I mean by human subject is a living individual who you're collecting data through intervention or interaction with. Okay, so are you working with human beings in some way? And then the second part of the question comes from whether it is considered a systematic investigation. So by that, the common rule, this is why we have a law student that is involved in this, which is, I'm so grateful to Leslie for, because law is not my forte. But systematic investigation here refers to the research development, evaluation, and kind of studies that are designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge. So the systematic part is really important. I'll give you an example. We had somebody fairly recently that reached out to me to find out if the study that they were planning on doing actually met criteria for human subjects research. And what they were hoping to do was conduct interviews with live human beings, which would meet that first criteria, but there was nothing systematic that was going to be done in terms of that investigation. And they were really just wanting to collect some interviews in order to archive them at the university. So that technically would not be considered human subjects research at this point. If they have a systematic plan for what they were intending to do with those, that might be a different story. So if you answer yes to both of these questions, then you need to go ahead and start talking with your faculty advisor about how to submit for IRB review and obtaining approval. If you answer no to one of those questions, then there's a few additional questions that you can ask yourself. And these really relate to whether you're doing a study that involves a new drug or a new use for an approved drug, or it involves a new medical device or a new use for an approved medical device. Or the third piece of this is, will the data be submitted to the FDA or held up for inspection? If you answer yes to any of those questions, then you need to be submitting to the IRB. Okay, so I'm putting the brakes on IRB and which level to submit for, because I want to make sure everybody's aware that if you're doing any research at the university, you need to complete the CITI training, the city training. So it's a really easy process, but you have to make sure you allow yourself the time to be able to go through this, because you can't shortchange it. It easily is a 4 to 6 hour process. So you log on to the cityprogram.org website, and here you'll see how you go about doing that. You log on using your UMass Dartmouth credentials. The university pays fees for all of us to access the city training. And there's different modules that you'll take. Each of them, you're reviewing content, and it might take about 15-20 minutes per module to review. And at the end of each module, you'll answer multiple choice questions, and you have to score above a certain amount for each of the modules. And if you don't, then you have to retake the module. It really gives you a good background on why do we have an IRB in the first place. Historically, what are some of the things that factored into why we have the system that we have now? And so it walks you through what is the Belmont report and the Nuremberg trial. I mean, there's some really interesting history here that everybody that's doing research should know about. And it helps to kind of fill in maybe some of the questions you might have on, like, why do I have to fill out those pesky consent forms? And of course, I don't care, I'll just fill out any surveys. Well, there's a reason why we have informed consent. So I would say that before you jump into the city program to take the training, check with your advisor, or in the case of, I can't remember, Erica maybe, that's teaching research methods, consult with the faculty member that you're working with to see which CITI training you would like students to engage in. There's biomedical research, composites that can be taken. There's a few different options. And so each faculty member is kind of responsible for figuring out which one they would like students to take. So then once you've completed the modules, you can go ahead and it will allow you to print out a certification. You can print it out, you can save it as a PDF. And then the first time you submit to the IRB, it's really handy if you just go ahead and include that CITI training certificate. It's good for 3 years. Which is great. And if you leave UMass Dartmouth and you go somewhere else to finish up your education, get an additional degree, and you're still doing research, it's transferable. So it goes to other institutions. And then the renewal process is much easier than the initial ask. It takes maybe an hour and a half or so to do a renewal. So that's a good thing. Okay. So stop me, please. I don't see the chat when I'm sharing my screen, but if you have questions along the way, please holler and either myself or Leslie can help. Okay. All right. So I keep mentioning faculty sponsors. And so just want to encourage you to make sure to keep lines of communication open with your faculty sponsor. If you're conducting research at UMass Dartmouth, you should know who your faculty sponsor is that you're going to be working with. They have to approve your application before you submit to the IRB. So I know in the psychology department, for example, with master's students, they have to have their committee meeting, their committee proposal meeting, and the committee approves their project before they're able to submit to the IRB. You can't skip the committee step and go to the IRB because, you know, the IRB is assuming that there's some faculty support of that. And anytime a student submits an application, we expect the faculty member to be included on those emails so that they're fully aware of the, you know, the I guess, where you are in the process of IRB review. Okay. If you have questions about the IRB, faculty sponsors have different, I would say, levels of knowledge of navigating the IRB system. So they're always a good first place to start with answering questions on what form should I use, or should I prepare a written informed consent, or maybe I should do a waiver. Start there and see what thoughts they have. And if they end up saying, I'm not sure, then you know that we're here as a resource too. And you can always come to us and ask questions as well. We're happy to help. Okay, so 3 types of research, right? So we've identified that, yes, we're going to be doing a human subjects research study. So there's 3 different types of those human subjects research studies that get evaluated. If you're not sure which one you want to submit for, you can always email us and we can have a phone conversation to help you with figuring out what paperwork you need to submit. I've done that many times, and that's no problem. If it saves you some time, it's worth it. But it might be that by looking at some of this basic information, you're going to get a pretty good sense of whether you're submitting something that might be considered for exempt research versus expedited. Okay, I'm going to see if I can just move this out of the way. Aha, there we go. Okay, so with exempt research, these are research activities in which the only involvement of human subjects will be in one or more of these types of categories that I've tried to summarize and list below, that are considered exempt by the federal government from the requirement of a full board IRB review. This does not mean that you can skip human subjects research IRB application altogether. It just means that we don't have to get the entire full board of IRB members together for everybody to discuss your project. So that includes maybe things that might not be that surprising to you. Some of them are a little bit surprising to me. Like, for example, taste and food quality evaluation and consumer acceptance studies. That's pretty interesting. I'm not quite sure how they end up on this list, but I understand why. Any research that is on regular and special education instructional strategies, we have a lot of students applying through the STEM program and other educational programs from campus. So many of their studies end up going through as exempt because they're wanting to see what's going on in a classroom, maybe trying out, asking some questions about how students think about different processes in the classroom, or wanting to evaluate a teaching strategy in the classroom. That would generally be considered exempt research. Interactions involving educational tests or surveys, interviews, observations of public behavior. If you're able to keep that individual's identity private, then many times those might be considered exempt. There's a category listed as benign behavioral interventions. Again, if you're able to keep that individual's identity as private. So benign behavioral intervention might be randomizing participants, student participants to take either one online 10-minute training versus another online 10-minute training to see which one might help more with reducing mental health stigma. So benign as opposed to something that's considered invasive, right? Where it's really intensive, you're asking more demanding procedures of them, or you're doing blood draws, etc. If the research involves deceiving subjects regarding the nature or purposes of the research, then you're much less likely to be able to get an exemption. And that research would probably need to go through expedited. And you have to have a really clear rationale for why you would want to be deceiving study participants as well. Secondary research is another one that often can be considered as exempt. And again, this is through publicly available data. I can think of an example that we had recently of somebody that decided they were going to be accessing, they wanted to access, oh gosh, Leslie, I bet you're going to remember the one I'm thinking of. They wanted to access recordings of, it might have been like flight, they were like NASA pilots.
It was like they were reviewing the transcripts of astronauts throughout the years to see how their speech had changed when they were on.
Really, really interesting, but it was all freely publicly available data, but wanting to look at it in a very different way, in a systematic way. So that would be an example of exempt research. And then I mentioned the taste in food. I can make sure that these links get made available to everybody too, because the links that I have included at the end of each of these different sections are the Health and Human Services websites that give really specific examples and much more detail than this. I just thought it might be handy to have a pretty short amount of content to be able to understand at this point. Okay, so if you decide that the type of research you're thinking about engaging in might be considered exempt, then you would work to complete the exempt application, which is found on the IRB website, and you'd email that completed application, the consent form that you draft, any site letters. Maybe if you're conducting research somewhere outside of UMass Dartmouth, you would want to include a letter that from that site that grants permission for you to do that research. Any questionnaires that you're using, any other documents, and you would attach all of that in an IRB email that you send to us to take a look at. Okay, so that's exempt research. Do I have any questions on that at this point? I'm going to keep going then, because it might raise some questions for you when we get to the next category. Okay, so expedited research involves research that presents no more than minimal risk to human subjects, and it involves only procedures listed in one or more of these following categories. Okay, so it's still considered minimal risk, but there's typically a little bit more risk involved than the exempt category research that I was just mentioning. So most clinical studies of drugs, medical devices, any collection of biological samples through non-invasive means, blood samples. I list examples there too of routine clinical practice measures or tests such as ultrasound, et cetera. Research involving materials that have been collected or will be collected solely for non-research purposes. So this is a lot of the type of work, for example, that we do in psychology, also probably in sociology and nursing as well. So collecting records or questionnaires or surveys, that could be done through qualitative interviews or structured quantitative measures. It could be done through focus groups. So that covers a really broad swath of research right there. That one little bullet is deceiving because it covers a big amount of ground.
Elizabeth,
Mm-hmm.
Vanessa has a question. Do we need to complete the UMass Dartmouth IRB application form if we are submitting the exempt form?
So back here, yes. So the application is the one that you would submit for the exempt. Yes. That makes sense. You have other questions related to that, Vanessa? I can't see the chat, sorry. Yep. So, yeah, exempt typically will give you, so we'll review those materials that, like I said, the examples listed here of things that you'll be submitting for a proposal that you believe falls under exempt. We could get back to you and say, oh, there's a little bit more risk than we're thinking here. We're going to review this as expedited. So if that's the case, we might ask for a little bit more paperwork. But, you know, like I said, you're not really out anything by just reaching out to us if you have questions on which way to submit it. They overlap mostly in the documents that you would be sending, but regardless, you would definitely be putting in the IRB application. The big difference with the expedited studies that I'm just now talking about, you would also be submitting an IRB proposal document as well. And what that document really covers is, you know, what some of the scientific background on this, what's your justification for doing this, what are your study aims, just so that we as IRB reviewers can better understand the rationale for what the project involves. We're not here as the IRB to review your study methods and critique your methods, but really just more from the perspective of ethically, is this the most sound way to do this in order to minimize risk? And can we think of any strategies that might help you with making it that much more effective to preserve the protections that all human subjects deserve? Okay. All right, so I will keep going then. I think, where did I leave? Here we go. Oh, so I think I left off with collection of data. So with expedited research, generally speaking, if you're wanting to collect data from voice recordings, video recordings, any digital recordings, then typically that gets reviewed as expedited research. It's not a given. I can think of, there might be some examples where we might be able to rationalize that for going in as an exempt proposal, but generally speaking, it ups the ante a little bit if you're thinking about wanting to record people, because they're less likely to be considered anonymous, and it just it pushes privacy boundaries just a little bit more to have those recordings. So that's why they're often reviewed under expedited. And then the last bullet point there is any research on individual or group characteristics or behavior. So I give lots of examples there: surveys, interviews, oral histories, focus groups, program evaluations. That should cover pretty much all of the areas of people that are here right now listening to me, but much of the human subjects research that's done on campus. So, all right, so submitting with expedited review, as I mentioned, I'm just going to try to, this might feel like a repeat to you, but just to clarify, so expedited review doesn't mean that we're needing to convene a full board, all of the people on the IRB meeting, which takes more time so that we're really carefully reviewing everything. The expedited reviews are done administratively. So myself and Leslie, Andrew Carberg, who's one of the lawyers for the university, will meet weekly to go over the expedited and the exempt proposals that get submitted. Let's see. And then that is different than the full board reviews, which are considered greater than minimal risk. These don't happen as much. These submissions aren't quite as common. So full board reviews oftentimes involve populations that might need some additional protections. For example, if you are interested in going into the prisons and wanting to, I had a student, for example, a couple of years ago that wanted to bring her therapy dog into the prisons and run some group sessions there using the therapy dog as a way to help with emotion regulation. So that required a full board review of those, because we wanted to make sure that the prisoners were being treated with fairness and respect. Pregnant women, children, but not always children, are considered under full board review. Trying to think what else. Others that might be considered kind of more at risk, maybe those with more significant mental health issues, that just need some additional protections and cautions. So, and as I mentioned before, so plan on anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks for those full board review proposals. Given the rate that we see those, like I said, they are not as common. We have had, I think, Leslie, I think we're probably on like maybe 27 proposals that we have evaluated between January up to now, and we haven't had any full board review proposals be submitted.
Yeah, I started last March, and from last March to now, I think we've only had like 1 or 2.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the perennial question, how do we find these materials? Which is not always the most easy thing to do on the UMass Dartmouth website. So when you're logged into the UMass D website, right? So you're kind of like an internal member. If you go to research, and then Office of Institutional Ethics and Compliance. And then under that, click on Institutional Review Board. You'll find a link that will provide you with IRB forms and templates. If you don't see something there that you would like an example of, you can reach out to us, and we're happy to try to steer you in the right direction. We are still going through and trying to figure out where some of the dead links are to maybe old documents. Some of the old documents are still floating around on campus. So we're trying to track all of those down and eventually just eliminate all of them. For example, they still have chairs of the IRB that haven't been chairs for like 15 years. So we've got still some old information floating around, but I believe for the most part, the stuff on the IRB forms and templates, that page of the UMD website, that stuff is accurate. All right. And then let's see, a couple of other things I just wanted to mention. I won't go over this in great detail, but sometimes people wonder about what they should be aware of in terms of informed consent. And so the most important thing to consider with informed consent is why we're obtaining that. We want to make sure that we're giving individuals the sufficient opportunity that they need to make an educated decision about whether they want to participate in a particular study. And we want to try to avoid coercion, any undue influence. Remember, I point out that investigators can't waive liability in their consent forms, that we still, as a university, need to take responsibility for each of the studies as they're approved. So that's why it's really important to do all of the things, all of the procedures that you lay out in your IRB proposal. Make sure that you're being really consistent with those. And if you are, so with more traditional informed consents, where you're reviewing the document with a research participant, they're signing, and then you're signing, you're always wanting to make sure that they get a signed copy of the informed consent, that so they can keep for their records. This becomes a little bit easier. There's ways to navigate that. If you're collecting data online, you can go ahead and send them copies. You can build it into the questionnaire so that they end up on a page that they're allowed to take a screenshot. There's a few different ways that you can work to make sure that they get that consent. There's a listing here of the basic elements of informed consent. They probably won't surprise you, but just making sure that you are really clear in reviewing what the risks and the benefits are to the subject or to the participant. Benefits, I think, is one where a lot of times people like to talk about, oh, you're helping with world peace, and all of these amazing things will come out of it. But you can keep it really simple. I mean, you're helping with providing additional knowledge on a particular area. It doesn't have to be much grander than that. Be honest about what the potential risks or the discomforts are. Sometimes they could be physical, if you're asking them to sit in a chair for a long period of time, or if you're asking them to participate in a focus group or other group-based interview, for example, and you can't always guarantee their privacy and confidentiality. That should probably be listed out as well. So be open and honest there with those. Your faculty member very well might have examples that you can work from of informed consents as well. Okay, I think that's all I want to say on informed consent at this point. And then the other thing to mention, we've been doing a lot of these, what we call a waiver of signed consent. So say you're thinking about proposing a research study where you are asking participants to fill out surveys online or paper pencil. And you don't want to get their name or their contact information. It's just a brief survey that you're asking them to fill out. And the informed consent is the only document that would have their signature and their name on it. Well, this is a really good example of a time that you could propose using a waiver of signed consent. So it's basically as if you're going ahead and using the informed consent form, but instead of them signing, they're just checking, yes, I agree, and then they move on to the survey, or no, I prefer to not do this, and then the survey then is shut down and they don't engage in it. So they're still reviewing what's being asked of them. It's just that they're not officially providing an actual signature. And so I feel like, Leslie, I think you'd agree with me. I feel like a lot of studies that we see, we end up suggesting, why don't you take your signed informed consent and change that to a waiver of signed consent so that you don't have any names associated at all with the study. If you don't need to follow up with them, then it's, I think, a pretty straightforward way to be able to maintain anonymity and confidentiality of participants. Any questions on that part? Anything in the chat that I'm missing?
Nope.
Okay, all right. I think I just have two slides. One is, I just thought it might be helpful if you're thinking about, like, what other questions do I have for them? Well, I have them here. These are some topics that have come up in the past. So I throw these out as things, if you have questions around those, or you've been toying with like, how might I make that work? We are happy to talk with you about any of these or any other questions you can come up with. But I didn't want to give you a, full hour of talk when I might not actually be meeting you with where you're at with the questions you're interested in. And then the last one is just, as promised, that IRB email address. And then if, that's I think the best way, generally speaking, to reach Leslie and myself. If you need to reach me directly, I went ahead and put in my email address. Leslie, I didn't ask your permission, so I did not put your email address in because I figured they can also reach you through the IRB email address. And I think at this point, I can go ahead and stop share and we can just talk about what questions people might have.
Absolutely. I myself have a couple of questions, but I want to ask Leslie if she has anything to add to this beautiful presentation. Leslie, please go ahead.
Hi. So I think Elizabeth did a great job. I think one of the main issues that I see with students' consent forms is that they get very excited to do the research and they have great ideas, but then the consent forms are a little bit too technical and hard to understand. So I think it's really important to keep in mind who your participants are and make sure that they're actually able to understand it.
Got it. Thank you. Very important point. So Elizabeth, I have a question regarding using human subjects in other countries. Legally, are we responsible to follow the laws of the US when the human subject is somewhere else? And what happens with regards to the laws of their own country?
Oh my goodness. That's a big question.
Yeah, that's something that we probably have to look into. We have approved studies of, like, I know that we've approved one in Guatemala.
And Mexico as well.
So like it can be done. We just have to look into it a little bit more.
I think it's really important also too to have collaboration with sites that are there as well. So because they're not only is it a site letter that's a piece of paper documenting that relationship, but it becomes your point reference for what's the most efficient and kind of the way that I can be most successful in my research. So you're not going in blind, and hopefully they would also serve as a really good guide for helping to support you. But it's been done. We've done it with several studies, even in the last 6 months.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on the risk level too.
Yeah, we've definitely had several discussions around, depending on the country, how much should participants be paid, and are they potentially unduly influenced by that? And so I think that all factors into the conversation, making sure that if the information needs to be considered private, do we need to have signatures? It gets a little dicey when you're talking about, I'd like to record and there's signatures, but there's potentially other people that might access those. So all of these different angles, I think, need to be taken into account.
Elizabeth and Leslie, I have another question, and this is a question regarding interviewing professionals. Often in humanities fields, when you want to do firsthand research that has not been published anywhere else in the world, and you want to go directly to your source, who's probably an artist, an architect, a government person, and you interview them just as journalists would do, and you record their commentaries and their opinions regarding their own projects or somebody else's projects or their worldview in general. And they agree to that, obviously, because if they don't, they just say, I'm sorry, I don't have time for this interview. In that case, do we need to do all of this IRB business?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that This is where it becomes really important thinking about that systematic investigation part of the equation with human subjects research. So there's a really big difference between journalistic, I'm doing some interviews to be able to understand, as opposed to I'm conducting interviews to learn and systematically understand underlying processes, et cetera, that might be going on, which then help to inform additional research that I'm doing, et cetera. So I think it's, there's definitely, I feel like this is the broken wheel. Like it depends, I can see it going both ways, but it really depends on what you're aiming to get out of it and whether we can make a case for it. Is it a systematic investigation? Leslie, do you have things you'd add to that?
No, that's right. I feel like that is like the major point. It really just depends on what the questions are. So it's hard to say without actually looking at them.
But that's one, it's a good question, because that's one that
Yeah,
is,
very thin
I
line.
think it's something that could be talked about, over the phone too, to be able to kind of hash out like, okay, well, does it make sense to actually put in, it could be that it's, it might make sense given the questions and the design of what you're aiming to do, that you go ahead and just work to get an exempt IRB approval, and you're covered with kind of doing some of that work. So.
Excellent. This is all very, very helpful. And I know that a lot of our students also, they engage with the community, they go, they talk to people, they interview them, experts and non-experts. One of the things about the field of anthropology, for example, is that you're not obliged to mention people because you observe ordinary subjects. But when you interview a prominent figure, you're obliged to mention their names because that's their story, that's their area of expertise, and you want to acknowledge them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, this has been a very, very informative session. Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Leslie, for enlightening us about different aspects of the IRB. And I'll be in touch with you, Elizabeth, regarding those links, because although I know that students can look at this recorded presentation, it's easier to provide those links on the website of the Office of Undergraduate Research so that students can click on it and go to these pages. So I appreciate having access to those links. So on this note, I want to thank you again. And unless there's any final points that you want to raise, I want to end this session.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Leslie and Elizabeth. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Thank you.